1, 2, 3, 4. There are currently 4 Fire Emblem titles currently in development. It is absolutely crazy to think that just a few short years ago, the franchise was almost completely dead. After foregoing the localization of one Fire Emblem game due to poor sales, Nintendo and Intelligent Systems decided to give the series one last shot in the West with Fire Emblem Awakening. Surprisingly enough, Awakening hit it big and brought the series to the level of popularity it's at today. Not counting spin-offs, there are a total of 16 games in the Fire Emblem series. Allow me to take a few minutes to address the history of the franchise in this miniature Fire Emblem retrospective. The first game in the series was called Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. It was released for the Famicom in Japan, but us English speakers never got to experience this founding installment until 2008 when it was remade for the Nintendo DS as simply Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. It took us 18 years before we finally learned the story behind Prince Marth, aka that one blue-haired anime swordsman from Smash Bros. Much like Super Mario Bros. 2, Zelda 2, and Castlevania 2, Fire Emblem's sequel, known as Fire Emblem Gaiden, was a bit unorthodox. It didn't quite follow the same rules as the first game. For one, Gaiden introduced free-roaming elements similar to what you'd find in a more standard RPG, instead of being completely confined to grid-based skirmishes. Fire Emblem Gaiden was never released in the West, but fret not, for its remake, Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, is set to release in just a few months. Gaiden is probably the last game in the series you'd ever expect to be remade. Yet, here's Intelligent Systems defying our expectations. On the Super Famicom, they released Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, which acted as both a remake and a sequel to the original Fire Emblem. The sequel half of the game was remade for a Nintendo DS under the title of Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, and was unfortunately never released in America despite us having received every game since the 7th up to that point. In 1996, they released what many consider to be the best game in the series, Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. This game featured massive maps that make the maps in every other game before or since seem comparatively minuscule. The game's story was separated into 2 parts, where the second part features the children of the units you'd use in the game's first half. This marriage and children aspect wouldn't return to the series until 2013's Fire Emblem Awakening. In 1999, the Nintendo 64 has been out for years and the GameCube was just over the horizon, yet, for whatever reason, Intelligent Systems released the next Fire Emblem game for the Super Famicom. Fire Emblem Thrakia 776 acted as a side story to the previous game, much like how Gaiden acted as a side story to the original Fire Emblem. In the early 2000s, the series made the jump to handhelds with the Game Boy Advance's Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, which is retroactively significant thanks to Roy's popularity in the Smash Bros. Games. Likely due to the popularity of both Marth and Roy in Super Smash Bros. Melee, Nintendo finally saw it fit to localize the next installment of the series, Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, otherwise simply known as Fire Emblem. What most weren't aware of at the time is the fact that this game is actually a direct prequel to The Binding Blade, and one of the main characters, Eliwood, is the father of Roy. Just a fun fact. The last game in the series to be released on Game Boy Advance is Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, which, up until Fire Emblem Fates, held the status of being the only game in the series with no story connections to a past or future game. Fire Emblem returned to consoles in 2005 with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, another fan-favorite game featuring the mercenary Ike, the very first Fire Emblem protagonist with no connection to royalty. The game was popular enough to get a sequel for the Nintendo Wii, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Up until then, every game since Blazing Blade has been localized and the quality of the games remained consistently brilliant, but unfortunately the sales just weren't there, and for my understanding, Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon sold the most miserably. Plus, what with it being a straight remake of a Famicom game, it didn't do all that well critically, and people generally blame it for nearly killing the series. The next game, Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, never even got localized, making this the second time we missed out on the continuation of Marth's story. At this point, Intelligent Systems wasn't sure what to do with the series. According to an Iwata Asks feature, they actually considered making the next game take place on Mars, which admittedly would have been really cool, but in the end they decided to go all out and make this possible final game a love letter to the series. They ramped up the fan service and production values hardcore and released Fire Emblem Awakening. And I think we all know how that one turned out. Awakening was followed up with Fire Emblem Fates and its 3 separate stories, Conquest, Birthright, and Revelations. Again, the game was met with astounding success, thus solidifying Fire Emblem's new place as one of Nintendo's key franchises. Who would have thought? Thanks to the series' newfound success, Nintendo saw it fit to release the franchise's first spin-off games, Fire Emblem Heroes, for mobile devices, and while that's all well and good, I think most fans are excited for the next mainline installment, Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia for 3DS, the remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden that nobody really asked for. Speaking of spin-offs though, we're getting a 3DS and Nintendo Switch version of Fire Emblem Warriors, a Dynasty Warriors crossover much like Hyrule Warriors before it. This marks the very first Fire Emblem spin-off that's not a mobile app. Well, unless you count Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS. Get it? Because there's a lot of Fire Emblem characters in those games. Finally, after over a decade, Fire Emblem is going to make a grand return to consoles with an all-new mainline installment for Nintendo Switch. Literally nothing was known about the game at this time, other than that it's a brand new game of the series, and that is most likely going to be awesome. I simply can't stress how insane it is that Fire Emblem has reached its current status. It went from being Japan only to incredibly niche to crazy popular in such a short amount of time. If you haven't played Fire Emblem yet, what are you waiting for? Download the free demo for Fire Emblem Awakening and find out what helped make this series so popular. I'm crazy excited for the future of Fire Emblem, and I just wanted to make this video to talk about what's quickly becoming one of many gamers' favorite series, and hopefully spread the word. Thanks for listening. Question: what are your favorite Fire Emblem games? Tell me in the comments, and for future videos about Nintendo and gaming in general, please consider helping me out by clicking that subscribe button, or at the very least give me a like. And you can also find me at twitter.com/Ninty Love. Thanks for watching.